So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and bring to you our final building block speaker of the day. And Patrick Woodie actually needs no introduction. If you've been in the room the last 24 hours, you certainly know that Patrick's the president and CEO of the North Carolina Rural Center. And if you've read his bio in the booklet that you have, you know that he's recently added to his deep knowledge of rural North Carolina's challenges and opportunities by spending a year traveling across the state of North Carolina, putting 8,400 miles under his feet, and to meet with 1,600 local leaders with many rural communities. What you may not know is a statement that he made to me earlier, and I particularly found this interesting being a local developer in North Carolina. And he says that for the job he's doing now and all the great things that he's done for the state of North Carolina over the years, what has helped him the best was when he was a local developer in his home county many years ago. And I think that speaks a lot for what has brought him to the point he is today. Patrick Woodie, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, and thanks everyone. I'm glad to see that there's somebody at almost every table in the room, or I guess at every table in the room. Brian Etheridge and I had a chance to commiserate over how we should have negotiated a little harder on our positioning on the agenda. So, but we'll try to move things along and not keep you from your weekends too much. But I actually want to say every building block speaker you've heard up until now thinks that they were talking about the most important thing on the agenda, while I know that, the leadership building block is really the piece that brings it all together. It is, in essence, as Chris said, the mortar between the bricks that really kind of holds everything together. And that's a lot of what I want to share with you and talk to you about. I want to thank you for sticking around. We did consider moving this session to the T at Hole 2 and thought, maybe there'd be more people there, but looks like we got a good crowd here, so we appreciate that. I want to start with really a bold statement that everything we've talked about so far, everything we've worked on for these 2 days, will count for nothing if we don't put leadership at the center of it all. And I think there's no really more vivid example of what I mean by that than for you to really reflect on the case studies and all the building blocks that we've heard. And at the centerpiece of those case studies was really about leadership. And often it was delivered by 1 or 2 leaders, but I can guarantee you it was really a team that really brought all that together and made all that come together. Leadership is the foundation of the Rural Center's philosophy of rural economic development. It's a truth that I've witnessed countless times over the years. It really began with my work as an economic developer and also a county commissioner in my home county of Allegheny, and carried really throughout my career through the last year that I spent on the road with our advocacy director, John Coggin, visiting and spending some great time in all 80 of our rural counties. Leadership is the cornerstone of rural economic development. We can spend days talking about all the strategic plans we need to create, the importance of education, workforce development, healthcare, infrastructure. We can create ambitious strategic plans for all of those things, and we can pour all the resources we can muster into those plans, but if we do not undergird it, that work by growing, empowering, and including local leadership, it will all be done in vain. I'd like to spend the next few minutes giving you some support to back up that claim, and then start us thinking together about how we put leadership at the center of all of our work across these building blocks. First, it would be helpful to define what I mean and what the Rural Center means when we talk about leadership. Often we think of leadership as being a characteristic of an individual. We can all point to individual leaders that have inspired us and led us to where we are as professionals today. They were teachers, pastors, bosses, scout leaders, coaches, and yes, perhaps even a stray politician or two. We've spent our lives studying theirs, trying to emulate the values and personality traits that made us admire them and struggling to understand what it was about us and our efforts that didn't seem to live up to their examples. Good leaders share similar characteristics, and there are strategies that each of us can pursue in trying to develop our own leadership skills. But at its heart, leadership is not an individual activity. We are not led forward by charismatic individuals who have everything figured out and decide to pass some of their wisdom along to the rest of us. At its core, leadership is a group activity, and truly effective leaders are the ones who can build teams, who can create the space for meaningful collaboration, can break down the walls within a community or within an organization to create a more open and inviting space for things to happen. Make no mistake, economic development at its heart is without a doubt a team sport. Each of you have leaders in your counties and regions that are focused on each of the building blocks we focused on over the course of this last day. Collectively, you come together across these diverse sectors to form a team to make economic development happen, whether it's recruiting a new business to town, helping an existing business to grow and add jobs, or helping a new business start up and get established. If you are not working, functioning, and thinking of working in a team, then you're not being as effective as you need to be for your community. When the team is genuine and really functions at a high level, that's where the magic happens. That is why the Rural Center's flagship leadership program, the Rural Economic Development Institute, or READY as it's more widely known, has focused for nearly 30 years not on individual leadership skills, though that's a piece, but instead on how local leaders can operate within the ecosystem of a rural community to contribute to the success of our state's rural areas. Over 28 years, we have trained nearly 1,200 rural leaders of the state. Graduates of this program become part of a network of leaders who share a common framework of rural economic development and an understanding that they're not individually trying to row their boat alone. They will remain connected across lines of geography, race, and politics, and will give them lots of opportunities to hone and grow their skills and to bring others along with them. For me, 24 years after Ready For, that experience remains for me the most important event of my professional career. In fact, we have several leadership graduates that are here with us today. So would all of our Ready graduates just raise their hands? Thank you. So why is collaborative leadership so important? Well, in a rural economic development context, in a small town or a lightly populated county, it takes every person to get the job done. No elected or appointed leader, no matter how well-trained or capable, is going to be an expert on everything. And in our rural areas, we do not always have the luxury of hiring an army of experts who are able to handle every situation or challenge we face. Rural communities must involve the community and bring their collective wisdom to bear in order to tackle big challenges. When a community makes room for new and different perspectives at the table, leadership can emerge in the most unexpected of places. It is vital that rural communities make the effort to clear a space at the table for those voices and perspectives that may have historically been left on the sidelines. Those voices and viewpoints are no less vital to the future of a place than the most seasoned members of local leadership. In fact, it is those established leaders who have the most to gain from inviting those on the sidelines to the table. You've heard it mentioned a couple of times, the rural road trip that John Coggin and I embarked upon in March of 2016, an effort to spend intentional time in all of our state's rural counties to better understand the nuance and the diversity that exists across this big state, and to do more listening than talking. One of our first stops was a trip in Columbus County that came on the heels of Hurricane Matthew. We met at the Columbus County Dream Center in Whiteville and talked with a diverse group of leaders, both formal leaders and informal leaders in the community, college-educated professionals and at-risk youth, lifelong residents, elders of the community, and recent transplants. They told us about how Hurricane Matthew required them to come together across their differences and work together on responding to and recovering from the storm. They told stories of neighbors helping neighbors, municipalities working together across town lines, and relationships being formed in crisis that would stand the test of time. As always, we're inspired by the collaboration we see, and we're glad to report that the people of Columbus County are still working together to make life better for their people. Our hope is that communities across the state can learn from examples like Columbus County, and that it won't take natural disasters to bring us together. We all have those people in our communities we'd rather not engage. We all know there are people in our communities who have something to contribute but are ignored or sidelined. As rural people, we can't afford to leave leadership potential on the sidelines. Leadership for us is not always about picking up the battle flag and leading the charge. Sometimes it's standing back and setting an example. Sometimes it's being in the trenches with everybody else and grasping the hands of our brothers and sisters and pulling them along, and eventually watching them lead us. As I've traveled the state this past year, I've seen many examples of this style of leadership reaping transformative rewards for rural communities. And as we keep up with our Ready Alumni Network, we have seen them bringing new and too often unheard voices into the conversation about the future of their communities. There is perhaps no better example of bringing unexpected voices to the table and seeing amazing payoff than from one Ready alumnus in Scotland County, Norrin Sanford.
Here, you know that angle between North and South Carolina? That points right to us. That's the reason that's there, is to point to Scotland, Robeson, Hope County. And I moved back as a newlywed with my Southern Californian wife to rural North Carolina. Now, she was a vegetarian, moving into a county that had more hogs in it than people. And we weren't just moving back. We were moving back home to take care of my mother, who was an Alzheimer's victim. So that meant we were moving back into the modest brick rancher that I grew up in Laurinburg, North Carolina, to provide home care for my mother. So good news, bad news. The good news is we're still married.
That's good news.
The bad news is she's no longer a vegetarian. So, we're in the land of barbecue. Moving back as a mental health therapist, I was stunned to find that growing up in an area that always had a series of challenges, things had actually become more difficult. Now, many of us in the room share some similar statistics. But in 2015, Scotland County had the highest unemployment in the state. In our region, we have some of the highest generational poverty in the rural southeast. Neighboring Lumberton in 2014 was determined per ratio to be the poorest city in the nation for mid-sized cities. If you look at the Robert Wood Johnson assessment trending, our county and Robeson County, Columbus County, counties in our region struggle. We are some of the lowest ranked counties of the 100 counties in our health determinations. And Robeson County's violent crime rate was only beaten by Scotland County's violent crime rate. So those were the stats that we were up against. More importantly for me as a mental health therapist, I was losing entirely too many young people to the correctional system, to the adult correctional system for terminal incarceration, or worse. Coming from working in urban areas where I had more resources at hand, I knew that many of these young people could and should be able to be diverted from that kind of future. So we began working with young people that were kicked out of home, kicked out of school, and put on probation at the age of 14 or below. You see, in my work, we call that the unholy trinity of risk factors. Put across the landscape of poverty, this is your highest risk group. These are the young men upon which the adult prison system is being built. And through our program, we helped these young people grow into the leaders that will help us change our grim outcomes. we're growing change. And growing change is reclaiming and transforming a closed prison in Scotland County, North Carolina, turning it into a sustainable farm in order to form a national model to answer the new question of what to do with old prisons. That's a significant question for North Carolina. North Carolina used more forced prison labor than any other state in the nation to build our road systems. We had the largest number of prisons. We incarcerated the largest ratio of our population in 1980. And that story had never been told until Derek and a group of young people worked with PhDs from the good University of North Carolina, Greensboro's Museum Studies program to tell that story. So we're reclaiming, attaining, and sustaining. We're reclaiming opportunities for troubled youth. We are attaining education for returning veterans, and we're sustaining personal and environmental wellness for our besieged community to form a national model that we will then give away to the other 23 communities in North Carolina that has an abandoned prison.
Wherever we see transformative leadership in action, we see two resounding truths. One is that leadership is collaborative, the other is that leadership is innovative. Just as we often think wrongly of leadership as an individual trait, we also tend to have skewed views of innovation. First, it's a word that's used way too often without context, and quite frankly, often without a lot of meaning. Everyone wants to be innovative, and if you're not being innovative, you're going to be left behind. And innovation is typically personified by the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs of the world, people looking way beyond the horizon, exhibiting outside-the-box thinking, coming up with revolutionary ideas that no one could have seen coming. If that's you, let me know. I want to be the first one to invest in the next Apple. But for most of us, and to be truthful, even for the titans like Jobs and Musk, innovation does not mean coming up with a grand idea out of the blue or risking everything on a Hail Mary attempt at creativity. Rather, innovation really means listening to the people you've just brought into the room, especially if what they propose doing is different from what you've done in the past, and even if it scares you a little bit. Effective leadership means taking some risk, even when the path is not guaranteed or clear or certain. Too frequently, rural places deprived of resources are stunted by past failures. It is understandable that a place with limited resources and capacity would try to play it safe and maintain the status quo. But to put it bluntly, the status quo is no longer an option for our small towns and rural communities. Visionary rural leaders know the cavalry isn't coming. They know the future they want for their places. And they recognize that the change they seek takes long-term planning, a willingness to invest in themselves, a commitment to hard work, and a commitment to the long haul. It doesn't mean putting the entire county budget in limbo with an unproven scheme, but it does mean being willing to take steps in a new direction and sometimes letting a new generation or a new perspective take the wheel. One of the best examples of this type of innovative leadership actually comes from outside of North Carolina. At last year's Rural Assembly, we welcomed leaders from Greenville, Kentucky, to talk about their efforts to transform a rural community that every single one in this room would recognize. I'd like to share some of their words with you now.
So once we saw what we had to see, and we saw it with fresh eyes, and we realized and we captured how that made us feel, and we thought how a visitor or a new considering business might feel, we knew we had to do something. So we did this capital project, and it was underwritten by the Greenville Tourism Commission called Let's Paint the Town. And that just sounds fun, doesn't it? Anybody paint the town last night? I don't want to know. But we knew we had to do 5 things. We had to wake up, we had to put up, we had to show up, we had to roll up, clean up, and spruce up, and we have to keep up still. Sometimes we have to shut up. Just shut up. Sometimes we screwed up. Sorry, pastors. Sometimes we screwed up. But I tell you one thing, we never gave up. We never gave up.
So the question I have for you today is, how do we best be more intentional about promoting, embracing, and inspiring even more collaborative, innovative leadership in our communities? This is a question we ask ourselves every day at the Rural Center, and we only play a small role in this push for innovative, collaborative leadership, but we're making some big commitments to rural North Carolina. In 2016, the Rural Center launched Homegrown Leaders, an extension of READY, with a deep and broad regional approach to rural economic development and leadership advancement. It's a recognition that emerging leaders are busy people, and while not every leader will commit to a 9-day institute in Raleigh, that we as the Rural Center simply must do a better job and a more effective job of reaching people closer to where they live and work. The first Homegrown Leaders took place in 2016 in partnership with the Southwestern Commission and Southwestern Community College. The regional leadership training included 33 individuals, elected officials, government staff, nonprofit and faith-based leaders, business leaders, economic development professionals, and other community-minded people that lived in Cherokee, Clay, Graham, Haywood, Jackson, Macon, and Swain counties. We're learning in the process as well. We assumed that everybody in that class would know each other. After all, they live in the same region. They're all leaders in their communities. Turns out very few of them knew each other, but they do now. This year, thanks to the support of the Appalachian Regional Commission, Olivia Collier, thank you, we will launch our second Homegrown Leaders training in Western North Carolina. And over the next 2 years, we will offer 5 Homegrown Leaders trainings just in the ARC region of our state, while simultaneously we're working to raise the resources to offer Homegrown Leaders in every rural region of our state. The Rural Center, in partnership with the Golden Leaf Foundation and the Friday Institute, has been focused on delivering the Northeastern Prosperity Zone Capacity Building Initiative. We're working with 17 counties in the Northeast Prosperity Zone to build a diverse regional leadership team and provide in-depth coaching to cross-county project teams to identify untapped regional opportunities for economic growth and development. We anticipate the outcome of this work to result in stronger regional partnerships and resource alignment in northeastern North Carolina. We expect to see broader dialogue and networking among regional leaders, improved awareness of regional assets and needs, and more innovative approaches to meeting both the opportunities and the challenges of the region. Perhaps most importantly, we hope to see the formation of a solid foundation for a sustained network of regional leaders working collaboratively to improve the region's economic development efforts beyond the life of this single initiative. And when it comes to engaging a broad cross-section of leaders, we cannot stop with the usual suspects. We must constantly be striving to include voices that are typically left out of our economic development conversations. That's why the Rural Center has entered a 5-year partnership with the Duke Endowment to target and expand our work with rural faith communities. Over 28 years, every READY class has had leaders of faith. We've had pastors, we've had lay leaders. Every class has always had representatives of the faith community in it. Yet in conversations about economic development building blocks, faith communities are left out or not even thought of as being a resource within the community. This new multi-year program will work with lay leadership of faith communities to help them see congregational assets in new ways, explore opportunities for more in-depth community engagement, and to enhance congregational leadership capacity, both for clergy and for lay leaders. We may not immediately think of local faith communities as untapped economic development assets, but rural congregations are underutilized resources for addressing the larger barriers to local economic growth and prosperity. These new initiatives are examples of the Rural Center's commitment to expanding the net to develop the individual and team capacities of new generations and different types of leaders in every region of our state. And we invite you to let us know how we can do a better job of cultivating leaders that we're reaching right now, and that we're not reaching now. I now turn the question to you and to us all. How do we better support nurturing, developing existing and emerging rural leaders, and how do we ensure we have leadership teams in place equipped to meet the demands of all the building blocks we've been discussing? This is the key question for rural economic development, and how effective we are in answering it will define the future of our state's rural communities. Put another way, how do we install the spark plugs to energize our rural economies? And then how do we maintain those spark plugs and keep them running? These spark plugs, these on-fire leaders in rural North Carolina, they matter. A lot of them are in this room right now. And they are also important because they're so rare. We know our urban communities have access to resources not typically available to our rural communities. In an urban area, it might be easy to take for granted the talent level and the sheer number of new and emerging leaders. That can make leadership transition in our urban areas appear seamless. That is not the case for our rural places. In too many of our rural communities, the loss of an experienced and established leader, a spark plug, can have catastrophic consequences on the future of that community. We know leaders are not born fully formed. They're nurtured, they're encouraged, they're supported, and they need to be celebrated. Yet it is in these places where a single individual can have the greatest impact on the transformation of a place. It is also in these places where the loss of a capable and well-equipped leader can have the gravest consequences. Leadership succession is one of the biggest issues facing our rural communities today. Our state needs its current and established leaders to help identify and nurture our future leaders. Change can be frightening in a community struggling to find its path, but we can't fool ourselves. Rural communities can no longer afford to leave anyone on the sidelines. Funding is needed, but access to resources alone is not the solution. We can pour endless resources into a community, but if the leaders of the community are not prepared or equipped to utilize resources in innovative ways, it will become increasingly harder to convince funders and other resource providers to invest in rural areas. During our road trip, we met with 1,600 rural leaders in their own communities. I haven't found one yet who doesn't love their small town, who doesn't understand the assets that their community has, and who can identify some opportunities in their corner of the state. It turns out that the middle of nowhere is really the center of the universe, at least to the people who call it home. Today, our rural places face unprecedented challenges. At the same time, we are not without our opportunities. Joe Brannon said it best a couple of hours ago. If you look at yourself as a victim, nothing gets done. If you look at every challenge as an opportunity, things start to happen. Like those of you in this room who, in the words of Greenville, Kentucky, every day you wake up, you put up, you show up, you roll up, you clean up, you spruce up, you keep up. Sometimes you're going to screw up. Sometimes you just need to sit down and shut up. But through it all, I know one thing's for sure, you're never going to give up. Not on the places that you call home. I want to thank you all for your leadership and commitment to rural North Carolina. I want to recognize the members of our Rural Center team that have been here the last 3 days. Barry Ryan, our Vice President, Misty Herget, our Senior Director of Programs, John Coggin, our Director of Advocacy. I also want to thank Chris and Frank and Mike and the entire board and staff of EDP&C for your huge investment of time, energy, and professional know-how into this focused conversation about our rural communities. You set the tone of what it means to lead and to collaborate, and for that we are thankful. These conversations aren't just talk. They're essential to identifying blind spots and forging the regional and statewide bonds that will help us move forward together. As we come closer to the end of this time together, reflecting on all we've heard so far, I invite us into a forward-looking conversation. I think we can all agree that the more people actively engaged in our communities, the better prepared we will be for the generation that is to come. As you return to your breakout groups for discussion, I want you to ask yourself some questions. How are you already working to develop the capacity of new leadership in your communities? How could your plans and dreams for the other building blocks we've discussed be more quickly or effectively realized through cultivating more local leaders? What are you doing as an individual leader in your community to contribute to your community's team? And finally, what are you doing as an individual to nurture new and emerging leaders? Thank you all very much.